So, let's talk about industrial pollution. I've got a preamble for you, my friends. Kamloops is home to many different kinds of industry, and the amount and range of sources of air pollution from industrial sectors appears to be increasing. Although some companies, including Domtar, assert that they have reduced their overall emissions in recent years, other industries arrived in town, including a biosolids operation in Barnardvale, and a big question about the future of, guess what, the Ajax Mine project. It's still on the table. We even have commercial establishments, such as restaurants. There's like a couple around that are burning wood in an outdoor fireplace all year round, creating a local air pollution problem for workers in the immediate area, and for those who live and shop in that area. So that's sort of the preamble that I've given you. There are problems with air pollution. So here's number one question. What are your views, and we'll get a chance to answer this one, on industrial sources of air pollution in Kamloops? Is it a serious problem? And, if elected, what would be your plan for addressing these issues?
Air pollution is a serious problem, and I'd like to commend the work of the volunteers that have helped put these monitors up around Kamloops. It really speaks to the intent of our government to not provide information that might scare people, or or information that might help initiate more activities and activism against the corporate interests who want to exploit our environment. There's plenty there to exploit. There's enough air, and air is one of those, can be one of those silent killers. You don't notice it killing you when you're breathing in terrible air. I want to be clear that Beat and I are both opposed to the Ajax Mine proposal for all the terrible negative effects that we know exist around open pit mining. Our party has taken a position against the Ajax mine. We issued a statement a year ago, a full lengthy statement addressing it. And like Beat had said, the corporate interests are too intertwined with the Liberal Party specifically. The mining industry is the #1 funder of the provincial Liberal Party. And to think that there wouldn't be political interference in the lack of monitoring for air quality in our community is kind of a silly position. Of course there's going to be interference. That's why industries fund and give money to political parties. So we should be skeptical when the evidence is not being sought by our ministries, who are directed by a party that is funded by industry.
Transportation. Kamloops is at the intersection of many transportation routes. And historically, this feature of our community has led to significant development of the city and to the creation of a unique culture and economy. Now that said, with highways running through our city and rail traffic being a continuous presence, the air pollution burden from transportation can be significant, particularly depending on where you live, as you saw from Purple Air. So, what are your thoughts on air pollution from these sources, transportation, and what specific recommendations would you develop and implement ideally to protect our airsheds?
Just quickly from our party's platform, we're calling for an increase of at least 1,000 buses in the Metro Vancouver area with accompanying improvements in service. We also call for an expansion of transit alternatives in all areas of the province, including restoration of BC Rail and free bus service on the Highway of Tears. We are calling for an elimination of public transit fees and an extension to make the ferry service part of the highway system. So the pollution caused from vehicles is well, it's an unnecessary problem. We have the best way to get around and the most efficient for a society is through public transit. And we need to get away from building more roads, widening the roads and laneways. We know this only causes more congestion. Like, this has been well documented. And if you listen to the leading city planners in New York, they did everything they can to make it harder to drive vehicles in that city in order to address pollution, congestion, time wasting, and to increase productivity. Getting yourself into a car is one of the most wasteful things you can do. The vehicle is wasteful. It's a terrible investment on your money. As soon as you drive it off the lot, you've put 10 meters on it and you've lost a quarter of its value. The automobile industry is also, not coincidentally, a huge funder of our local media, and they like to see politicians who are not a threat to the automotive industry.
About 20 seconds there, Peter?
I've said enough. Okay, so it might not be fair because Peter Millibar isn't here, but he is the Liberal candidate in the Kamloops-North Thompson riding. Although it's, maybe it is fair I pick on him because he should be here, and the Liberals are not particularly interested in engaging in democratic processes like coming to debates and taking on their people who will poke them in the eye with their terrible contradictions in pretending that BC is the greatest place on earth and then also has such high and atrocious poverty rates. Sorry, I on a tangent a bit there, but Peter Millibar.
I wanted to hear that.
Oh, okay.
No, I wanted to hear that too, because we invited the BC Liberals repeatedly to come, and Todd Stone's office got back this last week, said he preoccupied. Peter Millibar not responding.
They're on the red board, we can hear.
Take that for what it's worth in terms of how they feel about your position.
So I did have one comment specific to Millibar and public transit because as mayor, he could have taken the initiative to increase the funding, as Donovan referred to. Yes, we can count on the province to have that increase in funding and match it. But we can also take the initiative at the municipal level. And Millibar, as mayor, would never, ever do that. And he said publicly, the automobile is the best way to get around. It's always going to be that way. So I don't know if he was prophesizing or thinking historically, but his attitude towards public transit is terrible. And when the opportunity arose for him to make public transit a priority and fund it better and make the service better, he's never taken that initiative.
Most people tend to downplay their own role in generating air pollution at home. Yet a significant risk exists for residential wood burning practices, from home heating, outdoor burning in chimeneas, and even the use of smokers to cook food. So we're doing this stuff. A lot of us are still doing this. So question, starting with Yad. Given that the city of Kamloops and many other cities, by the way, have failed to adequately address these issues, what role should the province play in protecting public health? If elected, what action plans would you move forward?
So our party hasn't taken a position on banning wood stoves, and frankly, it hasn't had a lot of discussion. And my concern would be around the rural areas where they don't have access to natural gas heating the way we do in the urban areas. So in populated areas where we do have alternate ways of heating our homes, it makes sense to ban outright and wood burning stoves. And I like Beat's idea of turning it into a trade in your wood stove for a handful of solar panels or alternate forms of renewable energy producing goods. And we do also need to address why is it they're burning wood still. And maybe it does come back to the affordability. I don't think burning wood is actually that affordable. However, if you're living in a rural area and you have access to free wood, the permit to go get wood for burning is free. You can drive your truck out there. It might be 2 minutes in fuel, and you bring it back and you have 2 weeks worth of wood. So the economic aspect of it needs to be addressed for parts of the province. One way to address that is our party nationally calls for a guaranteed minimum income. So if folks actually could afford and had a guaranteed minimum income that ensured that they could meet their heating needs, that would help get them off of things like wood burning stoves. Well, we talked about banning the wood burning stoves. You can pass regulations to not permit them in any new buildings that are created or built, whether they're single family dwelling units or otherwise. Regulation is a serious problem in BC, so the need to actually have enforcement and the capacity to go out and ensure that people aren't burning wood, regardless of the regulations, is also necessary. I want to sort of address some of what government's all about. Because we like to think government is here to serve us and to protect us, but it's good to distinguish what government's for if you're coming at it from the corporate world and if you're coming at it from the capitalist class. Government is there to ensure that a system exists so that your corporation can be profitable. And so we have the contradictions between what is profitable for the corporation and what the citizenry will accept as the cost to pay for that profitability. So capitalism itself is at the very core of the problem of pollution, environmental degradation. Naomi Klein did a really good job talking about the problems with capitalism itself. And capitalism is anti-democratic because in democracy, each person gets one vote. And that's how we decide our government. But in capitalism, the more dollars you have, the more power you have. And that is the opposite of what democracy is supposed to be about. Yeah, there should be absolute restrictions on idling trucks, but again, it needs to be enforced, and people need to buy into it as well. A lot of people just don't care. And I've worked in public transit and currently with the school district and transportation department, and also witnessing lots of other drivers out there. They just don't really care too much. However, and if you go back at societal changes, we changed the history of the way people drink and drive. It wasn't only just by shaming them, but by putting them in jail. And we need to be prepared to not only shame the idlers, but enforce and make restrictions severe and the consequences real. There have been some really extensive studies over the last couple of years looking at a lot of American culture, but looking at what happens when people are faced with facts that they don't like. And this has been studied around climate change, for example.
And backup is no good, Peter?
No, I'm addressing your question about education, because you can educate people and you can tell them that the guy running for president has lied 600 times, and psychologically people will double down on their false information. And it's unfortunate as it is, education is useful for people who want to be educated and find better solutions. But for a lot of people, it's a lot simpler to believe in what they've understood all their life. And when you tell them something that contradicts it, they don't buy into the contradiction. They find reasons to be more affirmed in their misbelief, even when you show them evidence and facts that contradicts their position. I understand the wood burning, having it as an auxiliary supply. I have a wood stove in my basement as well, and when I talked to Jill Calder last year about how harmful wood burning was, I didn't realize how bad it was. We used to burn it whenever it was really cold, and we'd make food on it too, because meat's pretty good on an open fire, right? Especially in the winter. Who barbecues in the winter? It was a real luxury. But when I found out how bad it was, the only time I burned it since then is when the motor on our furnace died in the middle of winter, and we needed to heat our house. So I burned it then. It seemed to be highly efficient because there was no visible smoke coming out the top. It's an old, but from Norway, it's an acorn style burner. So I understand having it as an auxiliary supply, but not as your main supply, or not even as a luxury. Like, we shouldn't be sacrificing the health of our neighbors, and we frankly don't have a right to do that, to impose your desire to burn wood and enjoy that and have it negatively impact other people's health.
Tell that to the man with the big diesel.
Pardon?
Tell that to the man with the big diesel pickup.
He shouldn't either. And I have told them.
Great. It's not working.
I know they need to be better regulated, not educated. Because it didn't matter that I told them. They tromp on the gas and blow black smoke in my face. Thanks. Yeah. Had I known I'd be the last, I would have prepared something more spectacular. But in regards specifically to air pollution, we suffer through air pollution because it is profitable for someone else. That someone else isn't in our community, usually. There are some profiteers locally, car dealers, managers at Domtar, people who do it exceptionally well by being able to pollute in our community. And it's a type of imperialism and colonization of the people in our community to have international corporations, whether it's Ajax or Domtar or GM or Ford, to have them maximize their profits and have us suffer through the emissions of their corporate activities. And as much as we can take individual action to drive a different type of car, it's still a car that's being produced it's being produced by a corporation whose job is to make a profit. And so when the opportunity arises to do something more environmentally safe, if that affects profitability, it's not going to happen. Their job is to make money for investors. Their job is not to protect the people in your community. And when those things collide, those interests collide, it is not the people in the community who win out. And this is why we suffer through unnecessary air pollution.